Hi everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits and I love rainbows and neon rainbows and randomly playing with these Dharma neon colors together on yarn. So today we're gonna pump up the rainbow volume. I could bring in some other rainbow colorways, but we're gonna be starting with these neon fluorescent tones of Dharma Fluorescent Fuchsia, Fluorescent Safety Orange, Fluorescent Lemon, Radioactive, Frozen Blue, and Purple Pop. These colors are designed to dye protein-based fibers, so wool, alpaca, silk, things like that. And the techniques I'm going to do today work best on superwash wool. If you would like to learn more about any of the dyes and equipment that I'm using, you can find links down in the video description. Please make sure whenever you're going to play with acid dye powders that you wear proper safety equipment. I will be wearing a P100 respirator mask, safety glasses, and gloves whenever I am dealing with the dry dye powder. I have a 5-gallon bucket that is around, I would say, a third full of some plain tap water. And I'm adding about a cup full of white vinegar to our pre-soak. I plan to use this pre-soak over and over during the course of this video. Right now I am starting off by adding 600 grams of Knit Picks Swish DK yarn. This yarn is 100% Superwash Merino. I do not need the yarn to soak completely. It doesn't matter if the fibers are well saturated because I am doing more random patchy based techniques. So if we've got some dry patches in the yarn, that isn't going to make a huge difference. But if you are doing something where you want more even color coverage, I recommend pre-soaking for at least 30 minutes. And, pressing the yarn down to remove all those air bubbles so you get an even soak. So for the techniques I'm doing today, this is actually wet enough, but I will go ahead and let the yarn soak in a bit. But whenever I say I quickly wet yarn, this is pretty much what I mean, that I dunk it in some water with vinegar and then I will squeeze out a lot of the liquid. Using some dedicated dye spoons, I took a little bit of powder from each of the containers into cups that I reuse for holding powder. I wanted to have the powder out of the containers because I wanted to go back and forth into the powder, potentially with damp gloves, and I didn't want to risk introducing moisture into the jars. I set up a pretty interesting situation today. I have one skein of Knit Picks Swish DK in a pan on the side, spread out, and I am actually going to use this as my quote mop and use it to speckle. So when I reach in and grab some powder, I'm going to dust off the excess powder onto this skein. And then the main colorway we're doing today, the dye that's left over on my gloves, I'm going to use that to dye 400 or 500 grams of the Swish DK with this random all over rainbow colorway. And I am going to add color until I am happy with the coverage on the yarn. I might go through 2 times of each color or maybe even 3. It really depends on the random placement of these neon vibrant rainbow colors. The reason why this seems so silly to me is that typically the skeins that I'm using to wipe my gloves onto them are what I call the mops, because I'm mopping up extra color that I'm not using. But really, they're the focus of today's exercise. As I get happy with the color coverage on one of these skeins, I'm going to go ahead and place it in a cool steamer basket, which today is just a pasta insert that I have ready to go for when I finish up all the yarn from this particular stage. I quickly realized a flaw in my plan to create something speckled at the same time I was doing the splotched colorway. And that is, I was never drying my fingertips. It worked well to get good coverage on the yarn with the splotches to sort of dust off the extra powder on my gloves. But it did not really work well for a ton of speckles because I would have needed to dry my gloves in between. So I'm going to go ahead and with this DK finish this up this way, but I think in the future I wouldn't do that just because I found it to be a little more difficult. I placed all of the yarn inside a multi-pot steamer setup for 30 minutes. I used all the yarn where I wiped my hands and placed it in the bottom inside a pasta insert over about an inch of just plain tap water. And then using the steamer basket, I placed the speckled skein on top to separate the yarn a little bit, but that would allow us to all use one pot, which is still heating up, and so that's why we don't see steam quite yet. Within 5 minutes, the whole steamer basket is nice and steamy. So you can reduce the heat a little bit, but continue to wait at least 30 minutes. Potentially I will go even longer, just because there is so much yarn here in the pot. It has been 30 minutes, so I'm now going to turn off the stove, and you can see just how steamy it is. And I just wanted to quickly give you guys a view of the setup. So I have the steamer basket on top of the pasta insert with the rest of the yarn below there. And then down at the bottom, there is some water to create this steam. So now I'm gonna let everything cool completely so we can wash it and go on to the next round of dyeing. I used the same pre-soak water to soak 600 grams of Knit Pick Stroll fingering weight yarn that is 75% Superwash Merino, 25% nylon. And I set back up to do this kind of technique using the same dye and the same little pans on the fingering weight yarn. Now, an observation based on doing this in the past. Since there's less yardage in DK weight yarn, it is easier to get good coverage and an amount of dye that I like on all of the strands. With fingering weight, sometimes it takes a little more time because there's some strands that clump together that are more on the inside. So I might have needed to dip into the dyes a couple more times to get the amount of coverage that I wanted. Each time I selected colors based on how I felt about the yarn. It isn't that I'm trying to be completely consistent from skein to skein. I really want to have a level of consistency within one skein. And so I'm taking this one at a time, because since the color application is so completely random, there aren't really dye lots and there will be differences between different skeins. Not having the mop, the speckle mop, to wipe the excess dye off my fingers onto before going and touching the skeins I was dyeing actually made a little bit of a difference. Having a tiny bit of extra powder on my fingers meant that I had more dye on my hands overall, which actually worked out well for the fingering weight yarn, which had a little more surface area to cover anyway. So that all worked out really well, and then I put all the skeins to steam for 30 minutes, just like I had done with the DK weight yarn. I still had a fair amount of powder left over. Some colors more than others. I was running low on, say, the yellow and green, but I had a fair amount of purple left. So I grabbed 2 skeins of Dyer Supplier Sparkle Soft, which is 70% Superwash Merino, 20% nylon, and 10% silver stellina. I let it soak for only a couple of minutes just to get the yarn wet, and then came through and dyed that with some of the powder, knowing that we were likely still going to have some left over. And even though the other yarn was not yet done steaming, I added this to the steamer basket, added more time onto the clock to steam set all now 8 skeins for 30 minutes. We still had dye left over. And this is bringing me back to a similar situation I was the last time I did something with these neon colors, and then I had leftovers that went for a lot of videos. To help get started with the leftovers, I grabbed 3 skeins of Bare Knit Picks Twill, also known as Superwash Merino Twist, which is 100% Superwash Merino. It is high twist, and I pre-soaked it in the same water bath. Then I took some warm tap water and crudely dissolved the leftover powders in that water. And then came back over and started adding that liquid onto the yarn in sort of a random-ish kind of way, with a goal to cover as much of the fiber as possible. This is not where I thought I would end up. And I have to say, I love letting the colors speak to me and seeing how they pour on and adding them more all over here in the pan. I think that the results are just so random and fun, and we have a pseudo rainbow order going on, but sometimes it goes backwards, sometimes forwards. It might be frustrating when you're knitting with if you're expecting it to always go in rainbow order, but we got pretty decent coverage on the reverse side. I want to steam set this, but I need to free up space in a steamer basket, so I will be right back. Fluorescent colors overall can take longer to strike. I would expect, for example, there to be some runoff, but I am picking it up without squeezing a lot. You can see most of the runoff is pink. That is not surprising, but I'm placing all the yarn into a steamer basket so I can go steam set this for, goodness, I'm not sure how long, but let me get it on the stove. And I can hear liquid falling down out of there into the bottom. The 30 minutes are up on our louder rainbow yarn. I'm gonna turn off the stove, and I am so curious. I know a lot of pink leaked. Ooh, that's so pretty. I know a lot of pink leaked down below when we started, so I'm not gonna be surprised or concerned if we see that. We did add a lot of volume of liquid here, but I'm going to leave the cover on to let this cool here slowly so I can have some more heat. More heat doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt at all. Let's wash 300 grams of our random rainbow neon DK weight yarn. And these colorways are completely random. Some areas have more colors than others. This batch seems to be very pink heavy. Sometimes they feel more green heavy to me. It really, really depends. But no two are exactly alike, even if I guide them at the exact same time side by side. They all have an approximately similar amount of dye. But, okay, well that's good news. I'm seeing no bleeding right now. That's what we want to see. The colors that we worry about are really that pink and purple. Those are the big bleeders. And so we could see some bleeding now with some soap. The main things I would do is make sure the yarn is completely cool before you wash it. And you don't need a ton of dye to get bright neon colors. So unlike some other colors, less is more. And let's see. No bleeding. Fantastic. So I'm going to go ahead and wash the rest of this sort of randomly placed rainbowed yarn, the one skein of Speckled. I'm going to wash all that off camera, but then I'll come back to watch the yarn that has that all over variegated color, just because I'm curious. That one had a lot more dye on it, so we'll wash that on camera. Let's wash this rainbow-tastic high twist yarn. That is so fun. The colors absolutely spread. In some places we've got some more muted hues, but the hues are so pretty. I love this twill yarn base. There's a hint of color, but I'm not concerned yet. I love this base so much. I just wish it had more yardage. That is the only thing that I wish. But hey, I dyed 3 skeins, so there's some yardage. And now with the soap, I am not and there's a hint of like something. But all right, I'm gonna rinse this another couple of times and come back. Because I'm curious. Yeah, I knew some color was leaking down because the yarn had so much dye in it that when it put down I could just hear liquid falling, so I knew some color rinsed down. This is actually the very next rinse. Oh, and I'm not seeing any more color. Okay, that's awesome. Sometimes there's just a little bit of something to rinse out and then we are fine. So I'm gonna rinse this one more time to get the rest of the soap out. Then I'm gonna put it through my spin dryer, hang it up to dry, and we'll come back and look at all of our rainbowy yarn. What did we do? 5 plus 12? So about 17 skeins? Woohoo! Rainbow party! Before I jump into the conclusions, I made some observations that I think are pretty interesting, at least. The color coverage that I got on the fingering weight yarn is a lot more full coverage. There's a lot less white left behind. Whereas with the DK, I really did limit the color placement more. There is more separation and there's more white in between everything. I am not 100% sure if trying to speckle onto yarn first and really brushing off everything extra off my fingers made much of a difference. But my fingers were wet, so I don't know. I definitely did not make that as much effort to wipe the dye off my fingers when I was doing the fingering weight yarn. And you'll see in a minute that there's some variety between the skeins, but that's just one thing that really stood out to me and felt different. But it also could be that when I was trying to wipe the dye off of my fingers to speckle, even though my attention was on these DK skeins, that I don't know, maybe because I didn't have that extra thing to focus on. Maybe that's another reason why I spread it further. Both are beautiful. They just don't feel related. I know I talked a little bit about the surface area issue, how there's fewer strands here, so it's easier to feel like I have coverage. And then in the fingering weight, I might discover, oh, there's more bare patches that I want to add yarn to. So it's possible that I just felt a need to add more coverage on here to have something feel balanced than I did on the DK. Here is the speckled yarn versus the mop, the more random patched color that I had in the previous clip. The differences are subtle because we definitely have some speckles over here as well. Ultimately though, it just comes down to the amount of coverage and the amount of spread with those colors. Because when you wipe the powder on, even if it doesn't go as far, you still have more concentrated and blown out areas. Whereas with the speckling, even though because they're fluorescent, they spread, it's slightly less spread. Here are all 5 of the DK weight skeins. And what is incredible to me here is that these all feel very similar to one another, but I did them one at a time. It wasn't like I was working on all of them at the exact same time, and we have a lot of similarities here. Whereas when I compared the DK to the fingering weight yarn, I felt more differences in the colorways, which is a bit mind-boggling, but I must have just changed up the technique, even though I dyed these literally back to back. One of the last times I did this technique, the colorways felt a little green heavy overall. Today, I would say that these are a bit more pink heavy, between the pink that we get from that purple pop and the pink from the fluorescent fuchsia. We have 5 skeins in this DK colorway, but it needs to be said they are different. There aren't dye lots with this type of technique. Even if I had them all spread out and was doing all 5 at the same time, this type of colorway is so random that you might not necessarily feel a shift between skeins because you're probably going to feel a shift in the color progressions within one skein. So, I mean, it still could be worth blending them, but I'm not sure how much of a difference overall that would make. The difference is subtle, but you can see the difference between the speckled and the splotched colorway. Both are fun, but there's differences. I do think I want to play more with doing all over rainbow speckles like this in the future with more intent. The stock yarn still reads fairly pink to me, especially as I step back and look at the average. We still have some speckling on here. It's still rainbow. We still have all the colors. It's just there's a little bit more blending of the colors and maybe more patches of each color. It's bright and rainbow and fun. And again, we have differences between the skeins overall. These colors are so fun. I love it. I love the differences that we get each time. And man, you know, one thing, I use Frozen as my neon blue replacement because it's bright. I like the way the color fits in. Probably would be better for me to use like turquoise or something. That is probably what that hue is. I'm not entirely sure. Because sometimes the blue doesn't go as far, because ultimately frozen blue is supposed to be a pastel color, but it turns out to be pretty bright. So I don't know. Just wanted to throw that out there. I am enjoying the consistency I feel within all the fingering weight skeins and the DK. Even though I was using the same technique, the same dyes, the colorways are substantially different. And man, that isn't always the case when I do these side by side. I must have just texturally been wiping my hands more on the fingering weight yarn, which if there was more dye on them, it does make a little bit of sense. But anyway, I'm just interested. The sparkle yarn is probably the most similar to the fingering weight. The splotches are all over and, well, it's really sparkly. I know I'll be dyeing this more in the future, but maybe next time I should try some silvery sock beyond just the sparkle sock to really pump up that sparkle even more. I'm not sure if you can really see the sparkle on camera because the light, I don't have like a direct light on it, but it's beautiful. Finally, we have our bright rainbow leftovers on the Superwash Merino Twist. We had a lot more of our warm colors here, so they dominate, but we have all the rainbow tones in a non-repeating, more random type rainbow, and there are absolutely differences between these three skeins. This is not a situation where I would say we have a consistent dye lot. But I guess, when do I ever say I have a consistent dye lot? Maybe sometimes with my tonals, I suppose, but sometimes the differences are more extreme than others. So it just really depends. I like the medium saturation of these colors. In general, I think I might enjoy it a little bit brighter, but given that I didn't know how much dye I was working with, we got good color penetration, good saturation, and most importantly, we did not get massive bleeding, and that is always really important. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I really hope you enjoyed this rainbow, neon, fantabulous time-lapse. Sometimes I just really want to play with the rainbows, and especially these neon fluorescent colors just make me so happy. So if you want more rainbows, let me know in the comment section below. I have a feeling that this type of colorway is something that I will revisit over and over and over again. If you enjoy my videos, please subscribe and smash that bell icon so you can make sure you get notifications on and you don't miss any new videos. I always publish new content every Tuesday and Friday mornings, but I also do frequent live streams and we have special events, and you don't want to miss any of the videos because we have so much fun. If you love the yarn that I dye and want to bring some home, head over to the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop. I cannot guarantee that any of these neon rainbows are still in stock. There's always a chance, but there are hundreds of skeins that are dyed and featured in videos on this channel. And I do include the titles and the approximate publication date in all the item descriptions. So you can actually go and watch the video to see a little bit more about the yarn before making a purchase. Or you could go and rewatch the video when you are knitting or crocheting or weaving or whatever kind of fiber craft you want to do with the yarn. You can find links to my shop down in the video description. Thank you so much for watching.